How many of you have actually seen the piece already? Oh, a few. Okay. There are no spoilers here. I mean, you know, the sheep are all over the newspapers. It is, as those of you who've seen it already know, a pretty remarkable work. We had a panel discussion last night sort of focusing in on the Materie itself. Tonight we wanted to talk more about the kind of enduring and surprisingly varied influence of Louis Andriessen as a composer. And Nathan, you actually studied with Louis. You were a student. Mm-hmm. Donnacha and Julie, your sort of student / protege relationship is a little harder for me to parse. Well, tell us what your experiences were.
You first, Julie.
Okay. Well, you know, I do think of him as my teacher, but Louis is very formal about these things, and so we didn't have proper lessons. But I got a Fulbright grant to live in Amsterdam, and I went there specifically because he was there, and the scene that surrounded him was just so incredibly vital. That was, I think, 1992, 93, right around the time. We played a lot of ping pong, actually. There's this funny little ping pong club where there's left-wing writers and some performers, and Louis and I would go and play doubles. You know, we have to switch off. One person hits, then your partner hits. That was probably the most formal, regular meetings we had. But then, you know, he just talked about music all the time. So hanging out with all the people that were excited about what he was doing, and you learn as you sat at the bar wherever you were.
Right. But that doesn't seem to be so unusual. You know the English composer Gavin Bryars. So this young English composer named Jeff Smith was a quote-unquote student of Gavin's, and I asked him, well, what does that mean? And he said, oh, we just hang out at the bar together. Have a pint, talk music. I mean, there's like a great old tradition of that being a way of kind of getting a mentor-protege or teacher-student thing going. It's not formal, but it seems to have been effective.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, about it with the same experiences.
Yeah.
A lot that's talked about, especially after a couple pints.
Did you find that as well, Donnacha?
Yeah, well, I actually had kind of lessons with him when I lived in Amsterdam around 2002. But yeah, I had originally gone to study at the Conservatory of The Hague after doing grad studies in America. But then I got offered a job in Dublin and went back to Dublin. And then Louis, I set up this group called Crash Ensemble, and we invited Louis over for the first concert. We became kind of friends, and then in 2002, when I lived there, I used to call to his house, and we would have little lessons, kind of, but they were informal, but they were great. He was a huge influence on me and kind of a mentor. And he would write long letters about when I'd send him music as well. He would always take that time to do that. And but he did like to give me whiskey, because he, for a while, couldn't drink, but he used to love Jameson.
The Irish whiskey, yeah.
And so he would like if I drank the whiskey during the lesson, so I could kind of live vicariously through it. But I never got drunk or anything. I can easily have whiskey.
No. So Nathan, what form did actual formal study with Louis Andriessen take?
Probably the same.
Yeah. Well, there was tea. I remember he'd always offer you tea, and he had a huge shelf filled with all kinds of different tea. And you'd go to his house, and you'd climb up these little stairs up into a separate room where he composed. I think he had 2 grand pianos up there, and you'd sit at the piano, and I'd show him. I mean, I was young. I think I was 22, so I was already kind of a late starter as a composer because I was a rock guy originally, and so he was. He'd look at my little sketches, and you know, we'd play some at the piano, and I remember seeing his scores, you know, what he was working on, and it was, you know, it was fun.
Well, last night's panel, we had Missy Mazzoli, the composer, based here in New York, with us, and she said that she went to Amsterdam to, I guess it was The Hague at that point.
I remember her when she was there.
At The Hague?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That year, same year, 2002.
And she said that she went there to study with Andriessen specifically because of this piece, the Materie. So, his music has sort of been in the air since the late 60s, and always with kind of extra musical associations. It seems like people didn't just go to Louis Andriessen to learn how to stack notes into chords and stuff, you know, that there were other things that you could learn from him. Was that your experience, Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, he'd always talk about books he was reading. I remember, for some reason, Paul Auster was read. You know, people were reading that then, and yeah. So, and then Amsterdam was just generally a really happening place, and you'd go to all sorts of concerts. And it was definitely the total experience. It wasn't just about the hour-long lesson or whatever.
Right.
And then I think you had to be enrolled at the conservatory in The Hague. So we could also take lessons with other people in The Hague as well, so.
But there was a kind of a political subtext to a lot of Louis' music, especially early on, where he was so kind of adamant about the Western orchestral tradition as being too hierarchical and, you know, the act of music making as a communal thing, which Julie seems to be very much at the heart of what Bang on a Can turned into.
Here's the man.
Yeah.
As we speak. Wait.
Ladies and gentlemen, Louis Andriessen.
This is your seat.
All my friends. I hope at least. A lot of friends. Thank you.
Well, should I answer for him?
You should
Well, the question was that people come to you, Louis, for more than just music and the act of music making as a communal experience as opposed to, you know, a democratic experience. And Julie, of course, as a co-founder of Bang on a Can, has kind of put that theory into practice. So that's where we were.
And I think that Louis was well, influential in so many different ways, but the political, getting to that point, you know, Louis can speak best to it, but the changes that took place, and we watched, as he explained, the changes that took place in Amsterdam or in all of the Netherlands is because of hard-fought battles, and so they really took to the streets, and this, you know, Orchestral Harding being a band that played in the street, it was all connected, the music, the politics, and the importance of, you know, fighting for the presence of art. And, you know, you were an instrumental leader in this fight. And that was very inspirational to us back then.
And for you, Donnacha, you mentioned the Crash Ensemble, which in turn seems to have taken at least some inspiration from Bang on a Can.
Yeah, and we were influenced by Louis. As I said, he came over for our very first concert in Dublin.
No, you invited me.
Yeah, yes, exactly. He was featured composer, yeah, for that, and so he was a big inspiration on us, yeah. And they were very early days of Crash Ensemble. It was rather ragged then, but it was great to have Louis' support. But that ensemble culture in Holland was really important influence as well. And there still is, although Holland has faced some tough political times recently. But certainly Holland was a very inspirational place, and Louis was instrumental in this for all these different groups that you would have, and often each having its own instrumentation, its own kind of way of doing things, and very much from the ground up. And that was both a huge influence on Bang on a Can, and then Bang on a Can were influence on us as well. And that was a hugely exciting aspect of Holland. And you know, Louis was very important in sort of fighting the kind of institutional ensembles, like there were early fights with the Concertgebouw when they did a protest against the orchestra. And that was a great thing, to question the givens of instrumentation, or what's given to you, because so often composers can be a little bit passive and respond to kind of a commission that you're given rather than think, do you really want to write for this? And that was a huge inspiration for me. Yeah.
So Louis, one of the things we were talking about is kind of your influence formally with students like Nathan, and sort of less formally with Julie and Donnacha, somewhere in between, having had lessons but not. And it seems like the distinguishing characteristic that, this is what I'm getting from what the three of them have said, is if you weren't an official student, the liquids had alcohol in them, and if you were an official student, it was tea. Is that basically the way it worked?
Well, when you are young, you have all kinds of ambitions, isn't it? And when you are young, you want to drink also and to find out things and to experiment. All these kind of reasons are there to do what you do when you are 28 or 30. What is very evident in my long life already, I would say, that when you are, the more the difference in age between the teacher and the students become, the larger the distance, literally in the way of thinking, and that is something you have to only experience. You can, of course, think it, but that it's so big is really very strange. And of course, when I was 7 years older than the students, you were one of the students, and of course, I did learn from the first one until the last one. I learned a lot from the students all the time. That is a sort of my. That's why I read so much books, because I want to learn and get things out of it too. My work. Now, teaching the same nowadays, even like in Princeton, I would say, my last experience is that the difference in the idea about what is important in thinking about music are totally different from what we thought when we were 20, 25, 28. And not to be concrete about this, but that is what I had. That feeling was very strong. And it's everywhere the same. It's in Holland the same. It's England.
So for you, has the experience of teaching changed from, say, 30 years ago to today?
I'm sure, this sounds very strange. I met, in fact, one of my students from there on the street. It was very nice, just 10 minutes ago. I'm sure that for an important part, I not really can imagine what is in their minds. Let's make it dramatic. And that's also because I find composing and talking and thinking about it the most only real important thing in my life. And that is not that I'm regretting it or so, no, it's because things change all the time.
So one of the things that in advance of this panel that I did was to ask each of the three of you to kind of pick a moment in Louis's music that meant something to you. As I said last night, Missy Mazzoli said that she had gone to Holland to study with you, Louis, because she had heard this piece, De Materie. For you, Julie, and for you, Donnacha, I think you both picked the same piece, which is the same moment of the same piece, which is the opening of De Staat.
Well, I picked two.
Yeah, you did pick two.
But the very opening was the tide, but then there was the moment where the voice was coming into the side. Was that the moment?
I picked the start in Mausoleum.
Right.
The voices in Mausoleum when they come in. Yes.
That-
I actually think I picked three.
Yes, you
I
did.
also picked Acacius and sorry.
Yes.
I've been greedy.
Yeah, one is hard.
Yeah.
Well, let me play a little bit of the opening of De Staat. Actually, Louis and I did one of these live. Do you remember that at Lincoln Center some years ago? They did the big performance of De Staat. I think it was at Alice Tully Hall, and I mention it because even though the two of you mentioned it in your responses to my email, for me this was also my big Andriessen moment when the chords stop and the voices come in. This is early on in the piece De Staat, and this is cue number 2. No, that's number 1. We're actually, so that's just a little bit of the opening of De Staat. And Louis, you've always written so well for chorus. Is that kind of is that part of this communal the democratic process of music making? Is the chorus a form that really appeals to you?
Chorus, choir?
So, sort of, the use of the chorus, and is that something important?
Chorus is okay, same as choir.
Yeah, oh,
Chorus.
same.
It has.
And if you could use the microphone, that would be great.
Oh yeah. It has in the first place to do with the political will in the piece. That is somebody, when you want to explain something, you should use text, first of all. In this case, I made it very philosophical, because you can make nice street songs also, which I did. But the start is something above that you don't have to directly understand it, but you can study it afterwards, before, you know. And I took one of the most profound, strange, poly-interpretable writers, like Plato, in this case. But what is actually, for me, very important is that this Plato is not even less comprehensible, because not only that his thinking is very complex, but also he thinks in an old Greek, which nobody can understand. Also the Greek cannot understand it when you do it in the way Sparta did pronounce things then in that time. That is all makes it, of course, finally art, and is the question if it's sung or played on the trombone actually quite small.
You know, the funny thing is, in recent years, as neuroscientists have been examining how our brains react to music, one of the things they've discovered is our brains do react to the sound of other voices differently than they react to instrumental sounds, but also the sounds of massed voices, of multiple voices singing together, triggers, it's that kind of sing-along effect. I mean, it's a more kind of inclusive and embracing form of music, and I don't think that would surprise any of you. I mean, you're composers, you probably came to that sort of realization, you know, intuitively. But now there's actual kind of science to back that up. And one of the other things that I asked you, Julie, was if there was a moment in your music that kind of reflected the influence of Louis' music. And you chose a piece that also has this kind of massed vocal sound. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, sorry, am I really loud now? My other mic didn't work, so I'm doubled. You know, I also wanted to say that that in the piece that we're mentioning, Anthracite Fields, that's also influenced by Louis in a very deep way, because I remember when I first went to Amsterdam, you were working on a piece, I think it was De Tide, and the idea that you would sit for several years and study, you know, as an American, that was a little shocking. You know, we're like, oh, I've got to write the piece, or everything's very quick here, you know, for better and worse, but this would seem to us like a luxury, this luxury of time. We thought, oh, that must be so Dutch to sit, but it actually is just so Louis Andriessen, this depth of looking into a subject, and that had a huge impact, maybe in some ways much later on me, but I was in awe of that, this digging deep into a subject like you did with, you know, both De Tide and other pieces, this scholarly kind of, you know, anthropological, whatever, you know, philosophical exploration before there's a note put down.
And so for you, for Anthracite Fields, that meant doing a little kind of sociology work, a little, you know, cultural reportage and stuff, right?
Yeah, so, you know, in my luxurious Dutch way, I spent a year interviewing, reading, and thoroughly enjoying it. And but I think that, you know, that early inspiration. But I should say that the notes are also super influenced by Louis. You know, the dissonance. I think that the minimalism, you know, so you associate it with the idea of minimalism, but the kind of bite. As Louis, he might not remember saying this to us, but the right-wrong notes. We always talk about the right-wrong notes. What dissonance is just going to turn it. I know that had a big impact on a lot of this, you know, next generations.
Yeah. So this is a moment in the first movement of Anthracite Fields, which is Julie's Pulitzer Prize-winning piece about the coal miners in Pennsylvania. And I think the clip will speak for itself. So this is clip number 5. Care to share the little joke with the rest of the class, Ms. Wolfe?
No. No, he was just checking out who wrote that piece. He wasn't, yeah, he was asking me. So I told him. Yes.
But the kind of the kind of sforzando, chordal singing followed by this.
Yeah, I mean, I really
echo.
feel like it needs a footnote, like seed to tide, Louis Andriessen. I mean, a lot of the other parts of the piece maybe don't relate us directly to Louis, but that what I wrote there could not have happened without hearing to tide. I mean, I don't know if you can hear it. To me, it's so inspired by that piece.
But you didn't realize that until in retrospect.
I'm a very unconscious composer. I mean, there may have been a moment where I thought about it, but certainly on reflection, I went, oh my gosh. It even says the last word is time, because that's how coal is formed. It's formed with heat, pressure, and time. And there's time, which to tide means time.
There's one thing you have to know about this subject in general, is, of course, as somebody said, I forgot who, probably Stravinsky, it's always Stravinsky, of course, good composers don't imitate, they steal. And the stealing is something which, when you really know what you're doing, is something what all good composers do all the time. And it is very good. And my father always had one example. He was a composer, for you who don't know. And it's very strange to have a father who is a very good composer also. But he said that he had found in a letter of Mozart to his father. Mozart was then, I think, in Mannheim, somewhere, so 17 years old, imagine. He said, yeah, and now I'm writing here some violin sonatas in the style they like here. That's nice, eh? And we even cannot recognize what he have meant with that, because it sounds like brilliant Mozart, of course. That's very strange, isn't it? But for him, he did little tricks which these kids in Mannheim did, the hip guys in Mannheim.
So, Louis, we're talking about, teaching and influence and kind of, spreading the gospel of making music and making music together. Who did you learn from, aside from your father? Who was your kind of main teacher, your main, the person who imparted those thoughts to you?
Well, how can I answer that when you think and listen to music already now, let's say 60 years or even more? And where does it start? It starts indeed in the things you hear in the house. And what is the music in the house which was played by my brothers and sisters? All these things. Little children's piano pieces of Alfredo Casella were the first confrontations with the wrong harmonies, to call them that way. Well, this doesn't help you at all when I give this kind of examples, of course. And from the other side, after this, what did I say, 60 years, the only composer I almost, and have a bad day if I don't, play and study always together is Johann Sebastian Bach. All the piano playing, and I still discover in the Wohltemperiertes Klavier, after this 60 years, it's very strange but true, should not be a B flat, it should be has a good reason to do the wrong note indeed. And he is amazingly smart in doing that kind of tricks, and I learned a lot from that, even up to today.
Donnacha, we first met 15 years ago because I was in Dublin trying to suss out the new music scene, and everybody kept dropping your name. And I eventually made my way to Trinity College, where you were this kind of central teaching figure. So did you kind of take any of Louis's techniques, any of his methodology to impart to your students?
I don't know. I just did it. I wasn't really, in a weird way, I was just super enthusiastic about it all and trying to make it up. I mean, what I said earlier, the whole idea of you taking responsibility yourself for doing it was really important, and for, you know, making the concerts as well. So really important for me was to set up Crash Ensemble as well. I suppose the one thing that I really like about Louis as a person is that not only is he a great composer, but he's also very interested in the other arts. And like even he does this little spring school at Apeldoorn, which you set up there, and it's near this wonderful, strange Dutch museum called the Krullermuller Museum. And the most important thing in that whole kind of week the composers do, I think, is this little bike trip to the Krullermuller, where you cycle around these sculptures, and he always tells them, now make sure you look at one piece of art really carefully. You know, don't just look at these are the things that Louis will say. And something of that inspired me as a teacher, that I didn't want it just to be narrowly on pitches and rhythms, but also about how you relate it to. And of course, that I think is really important in a city like Dublin, which in a way doesn't have a proper history of classical music even. I mean, Handel was there, but right. It's not really, it's more of a literary culture, and you know, a lot of my students end up doing very interesting collaborations that way, and that kind of inspired them in new work. So I think that kind of openness to what other arts can offer was something that I very much took from Louis. I mean, he's a great example of that.
Well, also your position at Trinity College was an odd one, because it wasn't composition. Yeah. You were in the music and technology department.
Yeah,
right?
well, that was the gig I got, and I just went for it. Yeah, and then they moved me. I was between two buildings for a while, so I was homeless, really, that means. But yeah, I also was really lucky. I had these strange students who were super enthusiastic, like the people who were techno people, and people who come from very different areas, and that was kind of inspiring. I don't know if this is the same with Louis, but I actually learned a lot in those early days when I was almost around the same age as them. And I would even kind of do pieces with them in class that then I would make into my own pieces. So it was kind of a very sort of inspiring, but exhausting. And I suppose in that way I did think of, like, Louis' Hocatus is a piece that came about from a class that he did on minimalism at The Hague. And that, some things like that, yeah, did really have an influence on me. Yeah. And just to do it with integrity, as much integrity as you can.
Actually, we have a clip of Hocatus, clip number 7. This is a little bit of an earlier work. Talking about music and technology, Louis, when you began composing and teaching, you were also kind of expanding the technology of the day, because you were writing for saxophones, bass guitars, electric guitars. You were using the technology of the day. It's different from what Donnacha's students are using, but the principle seems to be the same.
Well, I consider this to be meant a compliment, which is very kind of you. But I think that the technology, in the sense where the word is used, is basically using electronics in the first place. And using what I did, well, the bass guitar is, of course, from later date, but saxophones and guitars, electric guitars, in fact, were part of the, at that time, contemporary light music, amusing music. And that was very normal. I found saxophones just because I loved Charlie Parker and all the other players. I was listening there, and why do I write so much for brass? Is all because I loved Miles Davis so much, etc. And it was singing the same also. Why do I want the singing, the sound that I want? Because I was in love with all the swing singers in France at that time. Now, I'm not a great composer of electronic music at all. I did a few pieces in the 60s and early 70s, but it's not actually my thing. I do like to think, actually, not only about the clarinet or the saxophone, but the person who is behind the instrument. And this thing is so essential for me for the production. I actually don't like too much to listen to recordings and things. I prefer to be there when it really happens.
Well, and Duke Ellington, of course, was like that as well. He used to say, I don't write for a trumpet, I write for a trumpeter, you know, and you know, I write for Bubber Miley, not for a trumpet. Nathan, speaking of technology, I mean, you've studied formally with Louis, and the fact that a student of Louis Andriessen would be in a rock band, not really that surprising, you know, given the sounds that Louis has incorporated over the years. You do a number of things besides the rock band that involve technology, right?
Yeah, I make a lot of kind of weirdo electronic, hybrid kind of weirdo electronic pop records is what I called them. That was almost 10 years ago, and I do stuff on tape machines, and I just kind of do all sorts of different things.
And does that work kind of color your band, Hospitality?
Yeah, I do a lot of I try to sneak in as much weird stuff in Hospitality as I can, but they don't always let me. My wife's in the band too, so that adds to that.
So I asked you, you know, to pick a moment in your music that might be germane to our conversation, and you picked an excerpt from the Hospitality song "Sunship."
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I mean, I have pieces that are, you know, concert music pieces that are very, very influenced by Louis' music. But I thought it would be interesting to see how the influence has crept into this more pop idiom. And I think there's just something to do with the pitch, the writing. I don't know if you're going to play the excerpt, but it has something to do with Louis' sense of harmony and the doubling in the instruments. And
The right, wrong notes.
I mean, in a way, Stravinsky and Louis go hand in hand. I mean, I was really into the Apollonian Clockwork, the book Louis wrote with Elmer Schoenberger, just an amazing book. So yeah, those are very important ideas to me.
Well, this is clip number 4. This is Nathan's band, Hospitality.
Caught in the tide, pulled by my house into a lifeline. Dear, dear, rescue me, that's when I knew.
Surprising notes there, you know, and a little bit of surprising texture for a pop band. The funny thing is, when I asked you to pick an excerpt from Louis' music, you didn't go for any of the hard-driving stuff that the rest of us were all picking.
Yeah.
Tell us what you chose.
Well, I mean, Destat and Materie were probably the first big influences, but I picked Melody for piano and recorder. The pianist plays the piano single line, and I guess it's a recorder player is who it's written for, who can play a little bit of piano, and he or she doubles each other. But Louis has this sort of this serene, more quiet side that I am always drawn to, and it's that Apollonian, Stravinsky thing, and it's also very funny and very touching. There's a moment in that where the recorder does a little glissandi, and the piano is following along, but it can't do the glissandi just because of the way the instrument's made, so it has to do it in little steps, and it's just this real touching little moment. And his music filled with that stuff. And I really like that.
I'm not sure where in the piece we are here, but this is the work that Nathan's talking about called Melody. So that's just a little bit of melody. Louis, my understanding is that at least traditionally in conservatories in the Netherlands, if you study a single line instrument, the recorder or the violin, you're also supposed to study a chordal instrument like the piano or the harp. Is that the way it's done?
Oh, I don't know. It's certainly true that I'm born and educated on the piano. I'm not sure about if that has influence on your thinking about something like melody. That would be very difficult to distinguish and how to analyze such a thing. I think that's very difficult. What I found in Nathan's piece, very charming, is the side of me which is much lesser known, is the French elegant side, which is profoundly in my whole development, and has to do with the fact that my father was very strongly Latin-oriented, and was everything that came from Germany was wrong. That was a very simple way of thinking about things, which I am very grateful that he taught me that. But why I say that? Because what I find very good in what we heard from his band is the slightly going on in triplets, in this case, of the accompaniment and the bass, and that the melody is always in very long notes. That's very elegant. That has something to do with beautiful girls lying on chaises longues, as they are called, if you have any idea what that means, and doing nothing, basically.
So, Julie, you too are now a teacher. Do you find that you're passing on some of these things, do you catch yourself sometimes saying, oh, I got that from Louis?
Well, I think there are too many things I got from Louis. So, but definitely, I mean, I don't know if I could remember all the things that he's told me, but just certain things about register, like Louis would just say something, think about the bass. That would be it. I go, think about the bass. Okay, and I think what he's saying is that there are lots of parts to the piece, obviously, but that lowest voice, don't just ignore that. It's not just, let's say, the tune or the chords. There's something about the floor and how you're controlling that, and when you go to whatever low point you're going to. I interpreted it that way, and so I now, in my own music, but also with talking to students, I think, register is a very interesting parameter, as well as all the other things that we think about.
It's interesting you use the word floor, because last night our panel included Heiner Goebbels, the director of the show you're going to see tonight, and he talked about this piece, Louis, as being kind of a structure that you've built, and that music is not, music is creating the structure, not filling it, that you need to leave space. Now, this is a big piece with a lot of big ideas, and yet somehow, you've given us the floor and the walls, and as you'll see in the first movement, there are literal walls and roofs and things like that. You've created the space, you've filled a lot of it, but you've also left a lot of room for us as listeners to enter the piece and to think about what it means. Is that an important part of what you do and what you try and pass on to other composers?
It's a very interesting and intelligent approach to the work in general, I think. Thank you very much for the compliment also. I advise you to read in the program book of the Materie, which you will get later tonight, I suppose. There's a really very profound and sharp introduction of Heiner in the book about why he did what he did. And he talks more or less about the things you talk about now. And I was myself totally surprised that he saw and heard and found out things which I have never thought of. But I know that they were somewhere in my subconscious part to be very well organized, for instance, things like that. In the Hope is very well organized. I can almost all lengths I can take responsibility for. So that, it's certainly true what he says also about the relation to the essential forms he uses. I mean, formats, really things, objects. And that is very strong. And that, strange enough, gives all of us, when you watch, all kind of I call it spaces, to listen, to continue to listen. That's a miracle. It's really a miracle what he did.
Now, the sheep are not in your score. What was your reaction when you first saw this production and saw the sheep?
Yeah, but you should not talk too much about it, because it should be it should be a surprise.
All of the newspapers have articles about the sheep. It's all anybody is talking about.
Well, I may say one thing about it, and that is, in the first place, a compliment for Heiner. Don't forget that Heiner is not in the first place a theater maker. He is a composer.
Yes.
And that, how many composers are so strong in the visualization of, now in this case, large forms. That's amazing. But the first thing, when I saw the sheep in Duisburg the first time, or that was the first time, of course, no rehearsal, I just drove to Germany. And I was sitting there, and I had no idea what was going to happen. And first of all, depends a little bit on the hall. It was there longer and somewhat smaller than here. It was really very far, and it was quite dark, and then you didn't see very much. And after a while, and the orchestra is only moving up very slowly to this large pavane, but it takes a long time. And then after, I would say, 15 minutes perhaps, quite a long time, that was what happened in Duisburg. Depends on how they feel tonight, the sheep. Eh? You cannot count them then. You saw all these little things down on the floor, I couldn't see. And then more light, and then that's what it is. And hundreds of sheep. It looks like hundreds indeed. And I must say, I'm still now when I talk about it, I'm moved. I want to cry when I see that, because the innocence, it's the innocence, of course. It's terribly beautiful.
The production is extraordinary. And half of us have seen it, and half of us are about to. And to those of you who are about to see it, we salute you. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Louis, Julie, Donnacha, and Nathan. Enjoy the show tonight.